My love of the TV series Smallville is well documented, and there's one Smallville podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor to each and every episode, and the podcast continues with more great Smallville and Superman talk now that their series rewatch has concluded. Listen wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On To banner. We all love the big-budget superhero films, but the world of independent cinema remains a place of creative freedom and entrepreneurial spirit. Whether you're an independent filmmaker yourself or you just love movies, don't miss these New Jersey festivals. Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, and Round Reel in Bloomfield. And now they're joined by the Shorts and Stout Film Festival in Long Beach, New York. Event details, as well as submission information for filmmakers, can be found at filmfreeway.com. When Crisis ended in 1986, it had lived up to its promise. Worlds lived, worlds died, and the DCU was never the same. And soon, neither was Superman. Across the Man of Steel miniseries and a subsequent 2-year run on the main titles, writer-artist John Byrne revamped Superman for the post-Crisis era. Earth was Superman's primary influence. Kal-El was the sole survivor of a cold, sterile Krypton. Clark was never Superboy, but did dominate the football field. The Kents lived, and Lois Lane and Lex Luthor were reborn to meet the moment of the late 1980s. These changes have been debated for years. Now, in a new Digging for Kryptonite epic, we're revisiting the Byrne era one more time on the verge of its 40th anniversary and evaluating its ultimate impact on the Superman mythology and our fandom. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. After a brief interlude last week to break down Peacemaker Season 2, we are back in John Byrne territory. A little later this episode, I'll welcome first-time guest Duncan Bennett to discuss Byrne's World of Krypton, World of Smallville, and World of Metropolis miniseries. But first, joining me to shine a spotlight on 1986's Superman #1, written and drawn by Byrne, is our pal from Aw Yeah Comics Skokie, sweet Bernie Gersmeyer. Just when you thought you were out, I keep pulling you back in.
Oh, like the Godfather, man. I'm happy to be here, buddy. It's so good to see you.
Welcome back. I'm happy to have you here to just carve out some time and space to talk about Superman #1 in 1986 and the post-crisis landscape. Quite a momentous occurrence to have a new Superman #1 for the first time in decades.
You know, you said that. I've heard you say that, and you just said it a few minutes ago to me, too. I guess the first thing that comes to my mind is, after rereading this and reading it for the first time when I read it, too, it didn't feel like a #1.
No, it really doesn't.
It feels like a #7, which is more accurate.
Yeah, so we'll go through the issue, and just so people know where we're going, over the next 2 weeks, we are going to be speaking at great length, in depth, about Byrne's 2-year run on the main titles. So we're going to be spending a lot of time on Superman action and adventures, first by Wolfman and Ordway, and then by Byrne and Ordway. But like I said, I wanted to spotlight Superman #1 here. And
Nice.
Yes, to your point, it really doesn't feel like a #1. And when we had Mike Carlin here a couple of episodes ago, he said one of the notes he had given Byrne, this was before Carlin officially came on board as editor, but one of the notes he had given Byrne about Superman #1, he's like, how do you have Superman get defeated by Metallo in your first issue? And as Carlin recounted, Byrne was like, well, to me, it wasn't a Superman #1
Right.
because
No.
it was coming right on the heels of Man of Steel. It does read that way. It really doesn't
Yes.
feel like a #1.
Well, and even the first panel, like, it's mid-story. He's mid-action, tearing through a wall, looking into this lab that they've been tracking down his ship, and so we're kind of in the middle of the action. So it is a very interesting, if you were coming on board thinking Superman 1, you're like, wait, did I miss something?
Dude, it's wild to me, and people will hear me talk about this more in upcoming discussions, but it's wild to me that we end Man of Steel #6 with multiple pages of Superman flying through the clouds, thinking about everything he's just learned about Krypton and how it's ultimately meaningless because he's an American. And then we go right from that into Superman #1. And what does it start with? An extended multi-page sequence of him thinking about this lab he's investigating.
I'm not joking. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We don't have another person, well, an alive person, until page 6. And that's when we see Sheena Easton, Lois Lane.
You're referring to her look in this issue?
Or it's either Sheena Easton or Brigitte Nielsen from Rocky IV.
Fair enough.
It's either one of those.
You know, even before this opening sequence that we've already been talking about, and I know we're bagging on it a little bit, but I have to say the cover might very well be my favorite part of this entire issue. That yellow background and Metallo standing there beaming the kryptonite and just dominating Superman who's down. It's like, it's your first issue and it might be your last. It's so striking. I mean, if there's anything about this, Bernie's holding it up right now. If there's anything about this that really screams first issue, I feel like it's that cover. I feel like it's so striking. And as I've mentioned, I did own a few of the Byrne issues in my collecting past. I've since divested myself of them. And of course I'm kicking myself. I'm like, oh man, this would have been nice. This would have been nice to pull out of the back issue bin for these episodes. But I mean, I remember digging through back issue bins at the comic book store and seeing that. And seeing it as a kid at a point in time where I still had an extremely limited view of what pre and post crisis and a #1, what all of that even meant. Oh, yeah. But I remember seeing it and buying it because I think I was just so struck by the art and the fact that it was a #1. So that does hold some personal meaning and nostalgia for me.
No, I'm with you. I think I miss that. I feel like we have so many #1s now, no matter for whatever reason, whether it's a reboot or a new era or a new writer. Marvel does it every 12 issues. I feel like you're not even sure what series you're on anymore. But I do miss that, like, oh, this is the first one, and getting excited. But I remember I still have my 1987 #1. I have it. I found it maybe in the late 90s in a back issue bin. I was like, whoa. And I think I bought it for $5 because at that point, it's like, it was harder to find. But I know exactly where it is. I love it.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, cover dated January 1987. And we had talked when you were on here a couple of episodes ago for that kickoff segment about Byrne's list of quote unquote unreasonable demands, all the things that he said he wanted and that DC generally was quite accommodating towards. And one of them was a Superman #1. So he got that. We have this here. So thought bubbles aside, one of the other things that really struck me with that opening sequence of Superman investigating the lab of the murdered Dr. Vale, who had stolen his spaceship from the Kent farm. And as we'll learn later in this issue, created Metallo, who will attack Superman. As Superman's investigating, the thing I was thinking of, the lab is devoted to studying Superman, and it's got all these photos and all of this data. You know what I thought of instantly, right?
I feel like that reminds me of something.
So Lex's Clark Kent room from Smallville. This was a huge thing in the early seasons. He had this room devoted to studying Clark because Lex couldn't make sense of this car crash on the bridge that he somehow miraculously survived. Yeah. And all of his recreations of the event pointed to the fact that the car hit Clark, yet somehow Clark came out unscathed. Right. And this, of course, prompted Lex to investigate Clark in a myriad of ways, including this room. And we do get to the point at the end of season 3 where Lionel directs Clark to this room. Yeah. And he walks in on this. That's what I was thinking as I was reading these pages.
I mean, you got to keep in mind too. I mean, that's 2002-ish, maybe 3, right? Or actually, no, 2001 at that point when it starts. But you can't tell me Alan Miles didn't look at these books. I mean, it's only 14 years ago, like from that point. So it's relatively still pretty fresh.
Yeah, that's a good point.
There's so many funny things in this book, though, dude. Where do you want to start? Like, I think it's great. I still enjoyed reading it, but a few things I was like, oh, that's interesting.
Well, sticking with this opening lab investigation sequence, this is a good payoff to what was set up in the pages of Man of Steel, because even as early as the first issue, there was this mystery figure on the farm. The final page of Man of Steel #1, we talked about this last time, is Superman flying off. This is a job for Superman. Great. But you really got to pay attention and zero in on the barn because you see this shadowy figure here. And then by the end of Man of Steel, Clark discovers that the spaceship is gone. And so that's now the thread that he's followed. So we have that connective tissue, the little bit of a mystery from Man of Steel. They don't beat you over the head with it in Man of Steel. There's also in the Lex issue where Superman clocks that he's been photographed, or he has a sense that something's up, and then that's referenced here. So this does pay off on those threads. I guess, investigation aside, one of the things that I'm struck by is this is another instance of Superman talking about how even though he's of alien origin, he thinks and feels as a human.
Yes.
And there's another reference to conducting research in his quote unquote real identity as Clark Kent. So I do feel like in a lot of instances, it's a bit more telling than showing, but
I agree. Yeah.
But Byrne is being crystal clear about his interpretation of the character and how the identity works and who the true identity is and who the disguise is. And that is reinforced here. So for anyone who needed it spelled out, you get it. You get it right here.
Yes. And it's not it's not a bad jumping on point. So if you didn't, for whatever reason, pick up Man of Steel, and don't forget back in the day, like the back issue market wasn't huge. Like it was when the book was gone, the book might've been gone. So they did do some nice light recapping to help you if you were just starting off. But really lots of interesting, there's a panel on here where he's like spinning around and digging underground, and it kind of harkens a little bit to like the Christopher Reeve era. There's some vibes in this as I'm reading it that even though it was post-crisis, it still feels kind of bronzy in a lot of ways. It's got a Bronze Age still feel, and I think that I kind of enjoyed that. I also mostly really enjoyed looking at these pages. It at times, you can see where Dan Jurgens took some of his style or like how he tried to mesh it really well from the transition going from Byrne into his own books and beyond, because you can see like he doesn't make his Superman look that much different. It's really pretty close. And for that matter, you can see some Doug Mahnke stuff. Like if you really look at the Byrne art, you can kind of see some of that in the future as well.
Oh, right on. No, I appreciate your perspective on that. You know, you mentioned the digging. So yeah, the Superman's solution, he stumbles upon this lab and this murdered scientist and his spaceship and all this data.
Yeah.
And he thinks to himself, even though I'm a duly deputized agent of the Metropolis police force, you know, it's like, see kids,
so much. Yeah,
he's not an outlaw like that bat vigilante over in Gotham. But despite him being duly deputized, this would be more of a headache than he cares to deal with. So he just hurls the entire thing into space.
He just scoops it up. He digs a big hole, picks the whole thing up. And then we get this really kind of interesting thing about how, you know, he can fly objects the same way he flies himself through like force of will and not strength at a certain point. It's very interesting. And then I haven't looked it up yet, but I'm curious now. He mentions this whole Lagrange point where the gravities of the Earth and the moon like combine to create an area of stability. I'm like, is that a real thing? Like, I want to look that up.
Sounds good to me. Now,
sounds cool.
On the note of this scientist,
yeah,
and we get more with him in flashback later as Superman is battling Metallo, as Superman is asking questions of Metallo. We're flashing back to John Corbin asking questions of this doctor. Right. And we find out John Corbin had been in this auto wreck and Dr. Vale found him and rebuilt him as Metallo, powered by this kryptonite heart and power source. But so we learn about Vale and the fact that he had been searching the stars, right, for alien life and tracked this ship and believes Superman is the advanced scout of an alien invasion and wants to kill him. And Metallo will be the agent of Superman's destruction. I guess, I don't know. I welcome your thoughts on this. Like, how do you feel about the fact that this scientist was able to pinpoint the arrival of the spaceship?
It kind of struck me odd because I was not remembering this. Like I didn't remember this scientist or this whole side story. For some reason, I thought this was Lex Luthor doing this. Like Mandela affected myself. Like and I didn't realize that. And then I'm like, wait, who's this dude? Because then clearly like Lex is still behind things, but
Yeah, Lex will intervene later in this issue when he hears about Metallo and the fact that someone else is going to kill Superman before Lex. Obviously, he can't have that, so Metallo disappears before the killing blow. And then very shortly after this, Lex will have the kryptonite ring. So he's able to extract that from Metallo and all of that. So yeah, remains a key player. But yeah, it's not Lex at the inception here with Metallo.
It reminds me of Dr. Swan a little bit from Smallville.
Yeah, Veritas. Did they get the idea for Veritas from Superman #1 by Byrne?
We're going to start doing, you're going to go through the whole Byrne era and realize that all of Smallville is John Byrne's material.
Now, will that make me love the Byrne stuff more?
Yes.
Will it take away from my enjoyment of Smallville if I'm like, I just took all of this from Byrne? No.
Either way, it works.
This works fine for me. Well, you know what? Well, two things. One, when you say that, maybe you kind of gloss over this, you don't remember the scientist too much.
Right.
It is interesting, and this is going to come up in these discussions to come, but, for better or worse, and I think from my perspective, generally it's for worse, but there's not a lot of talk of Krypton or the ship or even kryptonite in a lot of the Byrne material. And so that might be part of the reason too, why this might not be the first thing we think of, because it's somewhat of an outlier in terms of this discussion of where Superman comes from and the business with the spaceship and the kryptonite.
Right.
Oh, but the second thing with the scientist, overall, it's fine. I'm not knocking it, but there is a part of me that feels like if this lone guy could track Kal-El's rocket ship to the Kent farm,
why couldn't anybody else?
Anyone else? Where's the government in this? I mean, I feel like that's the only aspect of it. That's why, of course, always going back to Smallville, I love the insertion of the meteor shower, because at least now we've provided some cover. And especially by the time Smallville came along, we're talking about more modern technology. It does become a bigger and bigger question, right? As technology in the real world gets more sophisticated of like, okay, can we really buy that the government is not going to be able to notice and pinpoint this? But yeah, even here, I do have a little bit of that question about why this guy and not the government, but it's fine. And yeah, I do like the fact that the alien origin is at least touched upon here. Oh, that was the last thing about that opening sequence that did stand out to me about. It's only been a short period of time since Man of Steel #6, since Clark learned that he's actually from Krypton. He's not a Russian cosmonaut baby, as his family had theorized. But he says, basically, well, there are plenty of other aliens. Like, it's not that big of a deal, right? Hawkman's from Thanagar, and Green Lantern got his ring from an alien. It makes sense, right? If this is the DCU that you're positioning Superman in this post-crisis era, that there are other aliens. But so I don't think Superman's wrong. It's not as big of a deal if it turns out he's an alien, because he's surrounded by all these other aliens.
Right.
So it tracks. But I can't help but feel like, well, does that not take something away? When Superman's the first, it's such a big deal. And then we meet the other characters. But when they're already sort of established, it just doesn't feel as distinct, and it doesn't feel like as big of a deal.
Yeah.
But in any event, we move from that to Lois and Clark jogging in the park.
Lois and Clark, and Clark hitting hard on Lois.
Yeah.
Like, this is a very different Clark than we were used to.
Yeah, I mean, he's there in his gray sweatsuit, and he's clearly been wearing Lois down, right? She's been not the biggest fan of Clark, because he weaseled his way in and got that first Superman exclusive. We'll continue to talk more about all of that. But there is a very interesting dynamic here, or an interesting moment where because he's a few minutes late and he's pleading his case, and she's like, "You're hard enough to resist as it is without that puppy dog look."
I know, that threw me off. I was like, oh, so Lois thinks he's a good looking dude. He's a hottie, but she's not going to go for it. And I'm like, this is very different. I don't remember this.
Yeah. Look, I've been talking about this. I'm going to continue to talk about it. So, get ready. But I generally am not a big fan of Byrne's depiction of Lois. But
agreed.
These little moments here, I liked. I would have loved to have seen more of this. Yeah. But to your point, this is not even the first time she's expressed having the hots for him, because going back to the Lex issue of Man of Steel, when he talks about, I try to keep in shape because he's got his weights there, even though she picks it up and she's like, these aren't even any heavier than mine, because he doesn't know how to calibrate, because they're all nothing to him. But he's like, I try to keep in shape. And she's like, and you've succeeded. So and here's the other thing too. It's in Superman #1 where Clark's thinking something like, Lois is easily the most vivacious woman I've ever met. And even going back to Man of Steel, when he was talking about her to Jonathan and Martha, he's like, oh, she's not a movie star beautiful, but oh, she's something. Their attraction to each other at this point is very physical.
Yes, it's more present than it ever was, especially in the later eras too.
Yeah, but just the fact, to have Clark in those sweats there to jog.
Yes.
does draw a distinction from what came before. And very shortly into this, when Metallo attacks, and he's still in his human appearing form, right?
Yes.
But Clark intervenes, and he even thinks, he's like, well, Clark Kent is known to stay in shape. So he throws a punch. And look, overall, for as much as as John Byrne and Marv Wolfman and Mike Carlin, they all, cited the George Reeves influence.
Right.
I haven't seen a ton of that really tough George Reeves Clark, but here's an instance of him actually throwing a punch, which really went a long way for me. I did enjoy that.
Well, and then not only does he throw the punch, but then he has to take the impact from Metallo's hit, because he's like, oh wait, I'm human. I have to take this hit. And he kind of hurls himself across the counter so then he can then dip out and become Superman. Yeah,
absolutely. And he really gets his ass kicked in this.
He really does.
If one of the things, and we talked about this, and this was one of Byrne's stated goals of scaling down the power level, you really see that here. He really takes some hits. I'm so glad you're here to talk to me about this, because we did a segment in our 200th episode about the many shades of kryptonite. And that's one of the other pre-crisis elements that is stripped away. One of those barnacles, I suppose, that had attached itself to the ship that is the Superman mythology. And in the post-crisis era, now we don't have red and blue and white and gold. We will see gold in the Pocket universe.
Yes.
In that business.
22, 21, yeah.
But that's very specific. Well, even before that, in the greatest hero of them all, the crossover with Legion.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Before we're done, you're going to be rereading all these issues.
I know, you got me. See, you're a jerk.
But in the mainline DCU post-crisis, it's just green kryptonite.
Just green.
So how do you feel about this?
But I like that though, and we talked about that. I think it's too easy a writing out when you have all different versions of kryptonite. You can just make it this kryptonite as a plot device. No, the green should be either weakens or kills. It kills him if it's in his system, it weakens him if it's around him. But I mean, you're gonna have to be a little more creative than, red makes him this. I just don't love it. I've never loved that.
Yeah, I think this was another in a fairly robust category of choices that I think was right for the time.
Yes.
I am glad that the other shades of kryptonite have worked their way back in. And as you and I talked about, they made great use of them on the television show Smallville.
Yeah.
And with Jeff Loeb in particular, right around the time of Superman, Batman, and Supergirl,
right.
And Jeff Johns did business with that in the post-Infinite Crisis landscape as well. And even more recently with the villains Farm and Graft in the Josh Williamson Superman. There's synthetic versions of kryptonite, but still you get that gauntlet.
And with Superman Unlimited, they're using it too. They're bringing, now that's the, again, big plot device lately.
Yeah. So
and I'll just stand firm and say I don't love it, but
okay.
Yeah.
No, that's
I've always liked one kryptonite. I've never liked the colors.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, for me, it's one of those things that I've grown to love them. Yeah. But I think I was able to do that. I think like I've been saying in these episodes about the importance of the process that we went through with the reboot, I do think it was important to strip that away and really zero in on green. And then with enough time and distance, we can start to incorporate them again and take a fresh look at what these other kryptonites can do. And I really have become a fan of them. But yeah, for the time, I'm glad that it was just green.
Yeah.
And unlike what we're seeing now with this kryptonite asteroid and the proliferation of kryptonite weapons, here too in the post-crisis landscape, it's not like kryptonite abounds.
No. Yeah. I can go, I guess I will go as far as say, it's not easy to write for Superman because of his power levels and because of who he is and because he's not human. So humans have natural flaws and things that they have to deal with, and that's easier to write for. But I mean, if you're gonna be able to explain things that would not typically affect Superman, the colors of the kryptonite would help. But I guess for me, it just became too much.
But yeah, no, I think scaling back the amount of kryptonite and the kinds of kryptonite for post-crisis, I think that was a very good instinct.
Agreed.
And so in this battle with Metallo, where Superman's really taking his licks here,
Yeah.
Metallo shares essentially what he's learned from this scientist about Superman being from Krypton, about the effects of kryptonite, and Lois overhears this. And so at the end of the issue, after Lex has swooped in and removed Metallo, we don't really see barely anything of that.
No.
But then on the final page, right, Lois asks Superman, "Are you an alien?" And he says he is. He only just learned about it, which is true, and asks if it makes a difference. And do you have her exact response? It's no, but it's a fairly tentative no, I believe.
Yeah, I'm not from Earth. I grew up here, but I'm native to a world called Krypton. Does it make a difference? No, ... At least ... I don't think it does, but why did you try to hide it from us all? That's the quote. And that's that's a great question. Like, because he wants to still be human. He thinks he feels and wants to be human. So he's not going to just spread it all over once he knows. But I mean, it's fair. It feels untrustworthy, right?
Well, and so I guess maybe that's, I can kind of argue against what I said earlier in this episode about how if you surround Superman with all of these other aliens, him being an alien really doesn't seem like that big of a deal. And I like when there's more of a power to that revelation, that part of who he is. But there is still the wrinkle of him, quote unquote, hiding his alien heritage. Now, this doesn't really go anywhere, but it's an interesting idea at least. And when he says it's a long story and I'll tell you about it sometime, he will in the World of Krypton miniseries, which we're talking about later in this very episode. One of the framing devices for the final issue, I believe, is him giving this interview to Lois and talking about Krypton and everything that happened there. So that aspect of it does get paid off. But yeah, him quote unquote hiding, I mean, that could have been something more to explore. But again, here clearly we are zeroing in on the human side of the character.
Well, and as a journalist, I could see I think he wrote that well, that she's saying, hey, why, as I'm out to seek the truth. Why would you lie? Do you have something to hide besides that? And like you're saying, no, he wants to be very, very careful how he shares that truth with and who, because he wants to ultimately fit in as one of them.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, right on.
That's all I've got, man.
Before you and I part ways, what do you want to share with folks about what's going on at All Yeah Comics?
Oh goodness, I'm trying to think if there's anything big down the pike. We got in a month where I think I said this last time. We've got a bunch of great guests coming to my high school and All Yeah. Everybody from Philip Kennedy Johnson to Tim Seeley, Mike Norton, a lot of just great people that are going to be at the show, promoting books and promoting what's next. And just encouraging arts education. And Mr. Johnson's making a stop at All Yeah for 2 hours and going to share a lot what he's doing in Superman and Hulk these days. And if you haven't followed Philip Kennedy Johnson, he does a lot of good things. Talk about like Truth, Justice, Better Tomorrow. His videos and discussions are really going with that flow. I think, at least I believe that. So
yeah, right on. No, we're big fans of him here, and I encourage everyone to check out All Yeah Comics. And I can't remember offhand if I said this on one of our episodes. I don't think I did, but back in September, my local All Yeah, Harrison, New York, hosted none other than Joe Kelly for a signing. And I got to go there and meet him in person after having spoken to him for the podcast. And it was absolutely great. So that's just another example of a lot of the great events that All Yeah has. So I encourage everyone to check that out. And I also want to give a shout out to our pal Steve Eunice, who runs the Superman homepage. He has a new book out called Beyond the Cape, The Journey to James Gunn's Superman movie. It's available now on Amazon, so I encourage people to check it out. You can visit supermanhomepage.com for more information. Bernie, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. And I'm excited to hear the rest of the episodes.
Right on. All right, guys, we're going to take one commercial break. And after that, my conversation with Duncan Bennett about John Byrne's World of Superman trilogy. We'll be right back.
Hey.
Oh, hey, Jeff.
What's going on, guys?
Oh, talking about Superman.
Oh, cool. I could talk about Superman.
I could talk some more about Superman.
We know.
I'll bet a few people would want to get in on this.
I'm down.
You know it.
That sounds like fun. I'll do it.
Cool, let's do it. We can call the show Men of Steel.
And you can find it at certainpov.com.
Or wherever you get your podcasts.
Yay!
As a Superman fan, have you ever wondered what would happen if a person who knew barely anything about comics decided to absorb hundreds of Superman stories from all eras and media? Robbo is that kind of person, and that's exactly what he's done on a new show called This Podcast Will Never Die. The first season, called Superman Will Never Die, starts with all the unexpected ways the Man of Steel stood out from the pulp heroes on the newsstands in 1938. Listen and subscribe to This Podcast Will Never Die, and you'll never look at Superman's trunks the same way again. We love digging into epic comic book runs, but what about the art of the single issue? Single Bound is a new podcast series hosted by married couple Amy and Logan as they review single issues of comics. And if the title also makes you think of Superman, you're not alone, as the Man of Steel is Logan's favorite character and a regular topic of discussion on Single Bound. Listen and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube, and follow the show on Instagram at Single Bound Podcast. Fat Moose Comics, established in 1982, is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Led by current owner Sean Hendricks, Moose has that rare, old-school comic shop feel and camaraderie, yet also remains a welcoming space for new fans. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you are in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Joining me to discuss the 3 miniseries, World of Krypton, World of Smallville, and World of Metropolis, all written by John Byrne, is first-time guest, Duncan Bennett. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Hi, Anthony. Thanks so much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here to talk about some books which I'm very fond of. I don't know where you land on them yet, but I can't wait to get into it with you.
Now, you've been a listener and a patron for a long time, which I really appreciate, and we've exchanged messages over the years, and I know that this period of time, this Byrne era on Superman, is particularly significant to you and your Superman fandom, yeah?
Yeah, that's definitely fair to say. It was very foundational for me. So the first comic book that I ever owned, Superman comic book that I ever owned, was a collected Titan Books edition of Lois and Clark Presents, which had Dean Cain and Terry Hatcher smiling on the cover. And as a very enthusiastic 5-year-old buzzing about the new show that was on TV, I saw it at my local bookshop. And to be honest, it was probably a little bit old for me at the time, but it was essentially a repackaged edition of some of the best hits of John Byrne's Superman era. So really, it was incredibly foundational to my Superman fan journey. And I knew nothing apart from the post-crisis Superman for 20 years, really. I don't think I really got into anything beyond the Christopher Reeve movies until adulthood. So it was all about that post-crisis era for me.
No, I definitely understand. Well, I'm excited to devote an episode to this trilogy of World of miniseries. Each one was 4 issues. They were published back-to-back from late 87 through 88, i.e., the second and final year of Byrne's run on the main Superman titles. As we've talked about, and as I discussed with Mike Carlin a couple of episodes ago, the idea was that Byrne was going to stick around longer than he did. So in fairness, I don't think this was ever intended to be the tail end of his run. It just sort of worked out that way. But like I said, I'm glad to spend the episode on this trilogy of miniseries because I feel like these often get lost in the shuffle. Perhaps because of when they were published at the very end of the Byrne run. Also, as of this recording, with the exception of the World of Krypton miniseries, which was collected in a wider Krypton-centric trade paperback a while back, the others have never been collected. My hope is that if/when we do see a Superman by John Byrne omnibus, that these will be included, because they definitely deserve to be part of the conversation. Each one of the miniseries has present-day framing devices to some degree or another, but they detail events that occurred before, and in some cases, long before, the events of Byrne's Man of Steel. So they provide a lot of backstory and context. The extent to which they are successful, we will discuss and maybe debate a little bit, because I think you and I might feel a little bit differently about them. But nevertheless, they should be part of the conversation. And I do feel like sometimes they go overlooked, sometimes by myself as well. So that's why they're getting their own episode here today. Now, credit where credit's due. While they've not been collected properly as of yet, they are all available in single issue form on the DC app. I know I complain about the app a lot, but when it has something, I want to give it its flowers. So I am grateful that these miniseries are there at least. We'll give them that. But yeah, I mean, so I didn't read these until really within the past 5 years. So this is the second time that I've come to them. And we mentioned Byrne wrote all three. On the art side, we had Mike Mignola doing the World of Krypton miniseries, Kurt Schaffenberger on World of Smallville, and Win Mortimer on World of Metropolis.
Which art did you prefer of the three books? Which one kind of jumped out to you the most?
Oh, I thought that the Mike Mignola art on World of Krypton was the most interesting to me. How about yourself?
No, I would definitely agree. I was looking back at the World of Smallville today, and I found the art in that quite reminiscent of the pre-crisis. Actually, it surprised me because it had been a little while since I'd read those. There are a few images in particular. I think one was actually the first page of issue 2 of World of Smallville. Yes, it is, where Clark is sitting on the moon without any apparatus at all, and he's looking back at the Earth, having a pensive moment, and it just struck me as an incredibly pre-crisis image, actually. So I did like that. I enjoyed seeing that, and I hadn't noticed that the previous time that I read these, which would have been a good while ago now. So yeah, I appreciated those elements of it as well. I like the way that he drew Smallville. I found it very, very bright, very colourful, just very, very pre-crisis. I could imagine an episode of an issue of Superboy, very much in that style.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you mentioned Superman in outer space. Yeah, I think imagery-wise maybe does conjure that pre-crisis incarnation, but they're quick to account for the fact that he's held his breath, he's holding his breath, and he's about to run out of air. So it's like we're very much story-wise or character-wise within that post-crisis mode of the more modest power set and more of those limitations. But like I said, these three miniseries give you a lot more backstory and context. We learn about Krypton's Clone Wars, Martha Kent's first marriage, Lana Lang's manipulation by the Manhunters, Alice White's affair with Lex Luthor, and more. Big picture, how do these land with you, especially now as you come upon them for a reread? Do they hold up for you? Do you enjoy them? Do you feel like they add value to this post-crisis iteration of the Superman lore?
I love that they do a lot of the stuff that we're often complaining, or you're complaining, and I'm complaining along in my living room about, which is that they actually put the spotlight on some of the background characters, and they flesh them out in a lot of detail. They give a lot more depth to characters like Jimmy and Perry White and Alice White, for example, as well, which I think is brilliant. Lex obviously has a lot of depth anyway. Lana Lang, I think they potentially give her a little bit too much depth, and maybe a little bit more backstory than we really needed. But that was largely to do with one of the times as well. I think there are parts of the books that actually landed with me harder than I thought they would do, having not revisited these books for a good period of time, and actually having listened to Digging for Kryptonite over the last few years and revisited and read along with so many areas of Superman's history that I wasn't as familiar with before, especially the pre-crisis stuff, especially the Superboy stuff. I got more out of it in some ways than I probably would have when I first read them. I must admit, I did find rereading the World of Krypton, I found that a little bit more challenging, even though I did enjoy the art. Just in terms of some of the complexity of some of the deep lore, but there are things about that I really like as well. That I do very much enjoy. So overall, yeah, I enjoyed some of them more than I remembered, even more than I thought I would.
Okay, fair. So like I said, I first came upon these when I started the podcast because relatively early on in Digging for Kryptonite, we did what ended up being a mammoth-sized episode, even for us. Which was a survey of the tellings of the post-crisis origin. And the first hour and a half of that was devoted to Byrne. We talked about Man of Steel and these 3 World of miniseries. And like I said at the time, those 3 minis were new to me, and I don't know that I quite knew what to make of them upon that first read. Upon reread, and that's why I like, we don't do it with everything, and we won't do it with everything, just to keep the podcast going. But from time to time, I do like circling back and revisiting something after we've had some time and digging in further. Because as you've heard, my perspective does shift fairly often, which I like. It keeps it interesting for me, and I like continuing to explore my fandom in that way. So coming back to them now for this reread, overall, I definitely enjoyed them more. I think I got more out of them this time than I did the last time. And this time I was squarely focused on them. Last time, again, it was part of this wider survey, so I was really taking in a lot. And these were sort of this weird little pocket. So, this time I liked really being able to just drill down on them. So overall, enjoyed them. Mm-hmm. I had the opposite reaction as you. The World of Krypton one, believe it or not, was my favorite, even though this version of Krypton, as I've talked about, is not where my heart ultimately lies in the Superman mythology. I can accept it, and I recognize it's the Krypton for this period in Superman's history. And I really enjoyed that deep lore, like you said, and seeing how we arrived, and we track Krypton over centuries. I liked seeing how we arrive at that cold, sterile, antiseptic world from the Byrne Man of Steel miniseries that we've been talking about. And it's weird. There's weird stuff, but I liked it. And I felt like that one, more than the other 2, was really additive for me. As for the other 2, like yourself, I really appreciated the investment in those characters and settings and dynamics. I appreciated the time spent, the real estate devoted to Jonathan and Martha and Lana and Perry and young Lois and young Clark and Jimmy. I really like that they got the spotlight. You're right. I am always complaining. I want more of that. I want more with the supporting cast. So at a kind of base level, I'm really glad that we got that. I think with those 2 miniseries, though, where I struggle a bit is that I feel like at best, some of the stories don't really add much. They're sort of harmless backstory. They're fine, they're readable, but they don't really do all that much for me. But at worst, I feel like some of them do take away, and they add these layers that I don't know. I don't know necessarily what the intention was, or what the value was supposed to be that was added with them. And so I do struggle with aspects of these. So overall, they're kind of a mixed bag, but it'll be fun to talk about.
Yeah, I totally agree that there is a mixed bag in there. I think I alluded to some of the stuff with Lana being something that I probably could have done without. And in fact, that Smallville one in particular, I would split that down the middle. So issues 1 and 2 for me were fantastic. Really enjoyed revisiting those. Found them pretty impactful for reasons we'll talk about when we come to it. But those second 2 issues, which focus heavily on Lana and the Manhunters, yeah, I probably won't necessarily visit those 2 issues that soon again.
Yeah, I would bifurcate that miniseries as well, just like you said. That's definitely the way it's structured. And I feel like if there's a theme across these miniseries, I think it's that you don't go overseas for an extended period of time, because if you do, some other guy is going to swoop in on your woman. Right? I mean, I feel like that's kind of a dominant theme here.
I feel like that's the lesson, and I am concerned what happened in John Byrne's real life to make that such a red thread between the stories. That's a good observation.
I mean, and I know I harped on this 5 years ago when we did this, but it still just jumps out at me that Jonathan's been away at war. He was MIA. They didn't know if he was alive, if he was ever coming back. And Martha ended up marrying this other man. And then in the very next miniseries, we have a very similar type of setup where Lex, then owner of the Daily Planet, has sent his oldest and best friend, Perry White, overseas to Asia for this extended period of time where he's working undercover as a reporter and is withholding information from Alice Spencer, not yet Alice White, and uses that information and ends up having this romantic sexual relationship with her, much to Perry's disappointment. It was just interesting, just like and I don't mean to keep going back to the Jeff Johns thing, but just like we went through the Jeff Johns stuff, and he pulled his typical trick with Toyman. Oh, it wasn't really Toyman. There were all these, it wasn't the real Toyman.
Yeah.
Right. And then the very next issue, same deal with Brainiac. It's just like, guys, like, what are we doing here?
That's interesting. Yeah. Okay. So Anthony, where do you want to start? Which series do you want to start with?
I think we should go chronologically and talk about the world of Krypton. So primarily we're following the story of one of Kal-El's ancestors, Van-El. And it begins on the day of his coming of age ceremony. He'll no longer be known as the son of Seg-El, but he'll be known as Van-El himself, this Kryptonian rite of passage. And we get a lot of information here about the debate over clone rights. There's this whole idea that Kryptonians have been able to prolong their lives, effectively attaining immortality, through the process of cloning. They harvest 3 clones for each Kryptonian. Each clone is at a different point in age and development. And these clones are harvested for parts when and as needed in order to keep the Kryptonians alive. And there had been a movement against this generations past that seemingly had died down, but now it's come back with greater fervor. And the inciting incident in this miniseries is that there's another Kryptonian, hopefully I remember his name here, Kanzi, I believe. And when we find out, this is pretty bonkers, but definitely helped account for why things popped off the way they did. What we find out is that Kanzi's mother had removed one of her own younger clones from the clone banks with the intention of the younger clone of herself being Kanzi's wife. You heard that right, audience. And so Kanzi freaks out, murders the clone, murders his mother, and is about to kill himself, but for the intervention of Van-El. But Kanzi is able to get the word out about what his mother has done. And the really, I think, crucial piece of information here is that from the powers that be on Krypton, the idea is these are mindless clones, right? That's sort of the argument against those who are advocating for clone rights. They're mindless. But this information about what Kanzi's mother has done blows that wide open, because no, this young clone that was going to be Kanzi's wife was aware, could think. And this plunges Krypton into war. And right at the beginning of this war, we have the total destruction of Kandor at the hands of the pro-clone group Black Zero. So that's our setup for this.
Yeah, and I have to say, I love these concepts. I'm a huge fan of these concepts. I love the idea of Krypton being a counterpoint for Earth if our worst instincts when it comes to a scientific point of view are left untapped, essentially, and we're just left to get into all these ethical quandaries, which we could very easily have just around the corner. I mean, you look at those conversations around the cloning and around what makes somebody not even necessarily human but sentient. We could be around the corner from those sorts of conversations with AI. You look at some of the sorts of things that are being built, some of the work that people are putting in to try and create androids using powered by AI. We could genuinely not be that far away from these sorts of conversations ourselves. And that's where I think this is really strong.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, that's the thing. It felt like a believable conflict that, to your point, isn't that far removed from, and even though this was almost 40 years ago, but still not that far removed from even things that we're experiencing today. So yeah, I mean, that felt like a believable, very intriguing conflict at the start of this. And so, yes, we mentioned Black Zero, and that will continue to pop up. The instance that always comes to my mind is the Superboy villain, Black Zero, from the Hypertime storyline. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I really enjoyed rolling through those. I hadn't actually made the connection, and I hadn't remembered that was where that name came from when we went through it.
So yeah, so there's that aspect to it. And then we follow Van-El as the story progresses, and this war rages on for 1,000 years. And so much of Krypton has been decimated. I remember reading this for the first time a few years ago, and it was mind-blowing, the opening of issue 2, because it's Van-El trekking across Krypton in that purple war suit, which I knew in my bones from the Death and Return of Superman, because that's what Superman returns to Metropolis in after he's revived in the fortress. And I never had the backstory and the context for it. And so then I remember reading this for the first time. I'm like, that's where it comes from. Yeah. I love that. And there's this whole idea that Van-El, he's in this suit, and that there's this webbing within there that's keeping him alive and monitoring and adjusting his vital functions and all that business. And then we'll learn later in this miniseries that technology is what's used to create those biosuits that all of the Kryptonians wear. And so down the line in Jor-El's time, that's what keeps them alive, as they've abandoned their cloning procedures after this war. But yeah, it was just, but I love me a Kryptonian war suit. I got to tell you.
Yeah, I've got to say, I know it's not your favorite version of Krypton. I love the aesthetics of the biosuits. I love that. And I don't know if it's just because it's ingrained in my brain from those first comic books that I ever owned and everything that I was seeing when I was growing up in the 90s. How do you feel? How do you feel about it? Because I know it's not your favorite version of the.
Yeah, I mean, I do like the visuals. That I've never really had an issue with. So visually, I'm cool with the redesign. But yeah, so this is the version of Krypton we're in, and we get all this backstory about the war. And ultimately, the war builds to this moment where there's a device of some sort of weapon that could obliterate the planet. And Van-El is able to stop this. But the implication seems to be that this device did enough that it caused that chain reaction within the core that over a long period of time will cause the fusing of the minerals into kryptonite that is going to cause this illness that's plaguing the planet, and that will ultimately cause the planet to explode. So you get, again, backstory as far as what ultimately gets there, which this is a question that comes up a lot. I've asked it, and I've been asked it about what should be the cause of Krypton's destruction. Should there be some sort of, well, if we go down the Bendis road, should it be a plot of a villain? Should it be purely natural? Should there be some sort of man-made cause? And so here, how do you feel about the way this plays out?
Yeah, I'm afraid it's going to be predictable. I like it when it's the hubris of Krypton. It's that they believe their own hype. Essentially, they believe that they were so smart, they were so intelligent, they were that they would never be caught out in this way. Essentially, and that it is that arrogance essentially that causes them to, and that loss of humanity, which causes them to lose everything. Essentially.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say this here, I definitely don't subscribe to the Bendis approach. Yeah, but what we get here actually strikes a pretty fair balance in my mind, because there's such a period of time between that bomb almost destroying the planet and those pressures building to the point that the planet actually does explode.
Yeah.
So there's a man-made component, but then ultimately, I don't know if feels is the right word, but ultimately still sort of feels like this is something that's happening within the planet, even though, yes, we can trace it back years and years and years and find out that there was some sort of man-made cause for it. So I liked how that played out. My question for you, because this is, like I said, I really like the World of Krypton miniseries, and I think it's effective in building out that backstory. But I guess my question is, as we move forward in the miniseries, and then the perspective shifts a little bit, and then I think it's the third issue where we continue to learn kind of what happened to Krypton, but now it's more from the perspective of Jor-El watching the holographic recreations of events. So now we're starting to see Jor-El's side of things, and we're learning more about the Krypton of Jor-El's day, where no, they're not using clones anymore, but they all wear these biosuits, and that prolongs their lives to the point where they only grow a new child in the gestation chambers when there's some sort of rare accident or calamity where a Kryptonian dies, which is so unusual. But that is what happens, and that's what leads to Jor-El and Lara's seeds combining in the gestation matrix. Yeah. But at this point, so we're at a point now in Jor-El's time of a Krypton where they wear these biosuits, they're not cloning, but there's no physical contact, or next to no physical contact they communicate, but it's all via screens. That's why when we get to those pages that we saw at the beginning of the Man of Steel miniseries, where Lara is in the same physical space as Jor-El, and their hands touch in that final moment, huge for that planet and that society. But I guess my question is, and maybe we can smooth this out, can we account for why the Clone Wars would give rise to this version of Kryptonian society where there's no contact? I mean, is it just that they were so ravaged by war that they all needed to kind of go their separate way? I mean, that's the part of it that I'm having a hard time really kind of syncing up.
I guess a way you could account for it is that obviously the cloning was a way of prolonging their lives. The biosuits are then their only way of doing it. They probably just feel vulnerable. They probably feel more vulnerable than they've felt for generations and generations. The biogenerative suits, I don't know how robust they are. Any idea? No.
I don't know either.
I don't know how robust they are. So maybe they just feel fragile. Maybe that's where it's driven from. There's a huge focus on science as well in society. I don't know if that's expedited by the Clone Wars, but it feels like they became more increasingly dedicated to that as a result of war and eliminating the possibility of future war. Yeah, I don't know. I couldn't definitively say.
Yeah, and I don't know. I was trying to come up with an example to kind of highlight what I'm talking about, but I guess, and I didn't land on anything. But I guess if the newer version of Krypton felt more like an organic response or consequence to what came before, but I don't know that we totally see it. But on the other hand, I guess maybe it just boils down to what the Kryptonians perceived as the messiness of the clone business and the wars. And that now the antithesis of that is this emphasis on order and what's a way to maintain that order, to cut down, if not eliminate, on that person-to-person contact. I would not have minded if that had been teased out more explicitly. I would have appreciated that, but maybe we can draw that line because, and to your point, the Krypton that we see at the beginning of the miniseries, the ancient Krypton of Van El, the people do mingle. There's this blend of art and science. It's definitely more in line, I think, with what we had seen of Krypton in previous stories. But then, yes, there's this emphasis on the cold, hard science and order, and that's how we get the Krypton of
If you think back to the period of when we were all going through the lockdowns from coronavirus, etc., as well, people's behavior did change quite quickly. People quite quickly became more distant from other people. They didn't want people in their space. We were wearing masks all the time. I guess, I go back to my imagination is that they would have just felt far more vulnerable than they'd ever felt before, which I guess is kind of how we felt then.
You know what, man? I think you might have solved it because it's right, and especially in this space where we're talking about comics and movies and TV shows and all that stuff. We've heard so many discussions about people's viewing habits. And how the movie box office is not
in the UK. Recovered. People still not really going, to be honest.
Really? So
I think that Superman movie would have made a lot more money 10 years ago because it did really well in the States, right? And it seems like people are going back to the theaters a bit more in the States. But if you look at the figures, it was the rest of the world actually where people just haven't gone back to the movies.
Yeah, and it's like every now and then you get a Barbie, you get an Oppenheimer, you get something that just really cuts through, but on a week to week basis, that's not typically what you're seeing. And so, I'm glad you brought that up because maybe, on a smaller level here, but it's like, in response to what we all lived through, that seems like a pretty core change in viewing habits and behavior. So on a smaller level, but now writ large on a Krypton ravaged by this centuries long war, maybe this is more of a natural consequence of it. I can go along with that. And we get more information here because, in Man of Steel #1, Jor-El talks about how, when I first saw Lara's hollow image, and now we actually get to see this arranged union set up by their families, and he sees this holographic projection of Lara, and he's just taken with her, and we learn that she's a librarian essentially. She's a keeper of the Kryptonian records. which appeals to Jor-El because he is this student of history, more so than his contemporaries, it seems, where he's really invested in watching these events that predated him and this interest in ancient Krypton. I could have done without him spying on Lara. There's this business about him watching these secret recordings of her. It's like, all right, I know he's limited because they don't have any contact, but I don't know. Not my favorite part.
No, absolutely not. I think the thing that works probably the least for me is the fleetingness of the relationship with Lara. I think actually, if that moment in Man of Steel where they do touch for the first time is after years and years of being in sort of matrimony but not having any physical contact or warmth between each other, and it's always been very businesslike, I think it lands harder. And that's the way I always read it when I read Man of Steel originally. So yeah, I guess that kind of changes that moment a little bit for me, which is a shame.
Well, I think this points to is something I bump up against with this miniseries, but I think this applies to the other miniseries as well, and maybe to Byrne's Superman work generally with respect to the treatment of the female characters, or in a lot of instances, kind of the lack of treatment. You know, the fact that they are kind of these more passive objects in these stories. And I don't mean to be coming in with 2025 sensibilities, you know, beating up on this. I recognize that the time that they were written. And I think thankfully we've seen over the years in stories across media where we have our female characters with a lot more agency than they had before. And I think that makes for more interesting, more dynamic stories. So I recognize the context in which these were written. But when we look at these miniseries, like this one, yes, we get a lot from Van El's perspective, and then we shift more to Jor-El. But we don't get anything from Lara's perspective. I mean, the fact that she shows up is like the one thing she does in this story, or going back to Man of Steel. So we really get it from Jor-El. When we switch over to World of Smallville in a moment, all this business about Martha's first secret marriage and everything, it's like it's all from Jonathan's perspective. And we're kind of just told why Martha might have gone down that road, but we don't get it from her perspective. We get a lot with Lana in the next couple of issues, but there too, I mean, she's just this victim of the Manhunters who are puppeteering her. So I'm not going to harp on this, but I do think it's worth recognizing and acknowledging. I think there's a severe limitation in terms of the women in these stories. And I think just kind of looking at the perspectives we are viewing these stories from, you know, kind of shows you that. So yeah, I would have loved, it would have been interesting to get more from Lara's perspective, and maybe that would have smoothed over a little bit of what you were talking about too.
No, I agree. I think, and actually that's the reason, it's not the reason, one of the reasons why for me, the theatrical cut of Superman 2 is my go-to. I love Superman, getting the opportunity to spend that time with Lara. And I feel that's actually a really strong element of the film. I actually prefer those scenes to the Marlon Brando stuff as well. And I don't know if that's because hearing about the way that he was on the set, hearing about his lack of interest in the project has kind of coloured my view of him as Jor-El a little bit, Krypton and all of that.
My last thing on World of Krypton, and of course anything else you want to talk about, but the final issue, the framing device, is present day Metropolis, as Superman is giving an interview to Lois about everything he's learned about Krypton. And he references that info dump that I complained about at the end of Man of Steel #6, where he's, you know, just pages and pages of him just flying through the mountains, just thinking about everything, and story's over. But here he's recounting to Lois. And I guess the thing that struck me, especially right after revisiting Man of Steel, it really bummed me out. And this ties in with my larger kind of frustration about Krypton's role in Byrne's Superman. Because at the end of Man of Steel, there's that whole moment where Superman's like, I can recite the ancient Kryptonian texts, and I know all the languages, and I have all this information, and ultimately it's meaningless. I'm an American. It's like, okay. And I still don't particularly care for that. And here, I don't know, maybe the needle moves a teeny tiny bit, because there's some emotion that he's expressing to Lois at the end there, as he's talking about this. It's ultimately couched within, I think he says he feels frustrated and sad for his birth parents, but he's grateful for this gift that they gave him of sending him to Earth. So at least there's some emotion there, but we're still not, like I said, we're not calibrated where I particularly like where I like it to be for myself. But I did want to mention that because I thought that was kind of an interesting kind of connection point.
No, it's a sweet. I mean, it's a real sweet spot, isn't it? There's things that I love about this iteration of it, but obviously there's things that don't naturally fit my sensibilities either. One of those would definitely be I'm an American, goddamn it, essentially. But what I do always go back to is I like that, and this was one of the things about Man of Steel the movie and Superman the movie that I feel veered away from the version that I really love is I kind of feel like in those movies Jor-El tells him what to do. He tells him it's essentially your God-given right because you're stronger, you're more powerful, you're more intelligent than everyone else. You've got to show them how to be a better person, and he essentially just goes and does it because that's what Jor-El wanted him to do, and that's what he felt was his duty as a Kryptonian. I feel like and this is what I liked about Gunn's movie as well, is I feel like it just gives him more agency. It just makes it about his human upbringing, yes, but also just who he fundamentally is as a person. If you remove that element completely or more heavily than it is in a lot of versions, and I think the movies before 25 all were a little bit guilty of overplaying the Krypton hand in terms of Clark becoming Superman, which is why for me it was so refreshing in Superman 25 for it to be spun the other way, and almost for that to be the heart of the movie, in that he was believing that at the start of the film, and then by the end of the film he realizes that actually it was Martha and Jonathan that made him Superman all along.
Yeah, no, right on. I hear you, and we've talked about all those movies before, and in Superman the movie, most of all, that is definitely something that I have struggled with and more or less made peace with, but it's still not my favorite part of the movie. The fact that we have those 12 years in the fortress being quote unquote programmed or trained by Jor-El, and serves some functions. I think it definitely helps account for why people don't recognize him. And it's definitely more biblical that he's gone for that long, but it's not, it's really still not what I would adhere to in terms of why Clark does what he does. So, and going back to Byrne here, in fairness, it's like, I don't need the pre-crisis mode of him saying great row all the time or anything like that. And I still think the idea that the humanity, the earthly side, the upbringing with the Kents, that's the driving force, that does work for me. So I do just want to, I want to make sure I'm clear for the audience here. Like I said, I think this just goes a little too far in the other direction. But with the miniseries itself, I am grateful that Byrne had this worked out. And I don't know if this was what he had always intended from the start of Man of Steel, or if this came later. Obviously it was published later. I don't know when the ideas came to him, but whether it was from the inception or he kind of circled back around to it later, the fact that he worked out all of this Kryptonian history, I think it's cool. Like I'm glad that we got this. So I would say this was my favorite.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you liked it. Do you know what? I've got more out of it having the conversation with you than I did revisiting it this time. I think potentially reading this one at speed, it's the heaviest. It's the heaviest to get through. Whereas the others are a little bit lighter until you get to the Manhunter stuff.
All right. So on that note, so the next miniseries here, the next 4-parter is World of Smallville. And I don't want to forget this. So let me just say what jumped out at me. And I'm sure I've talked about this in other episodes, but the man that Martha had married before Jonathan was Dan Fordman. And then the town doctor is Dr. Whitney Fordman. So I don't know. And I don't know if the Smallville creators or writers have ever talked about this, but I mean, I have to imagine that Whitney's name came. I mean, but at the same time, this is pretty obscure, this miniseries. I mean, that would be
it's an obscure pull, that, yeah.
Yeah, that would be a weird
I think we might be giving them too much credit for that. Like having seen Smallville, I'm not sure. Interesting.
Yeah. Now, if Whitney had been introduced during Jeff Loeb's time on the show, where he was like their comic book guy, all right, then maybe. But no, Whitney was there from the jump. Yeah. But I don't know. I don't know. I mean, that's a huge coincidence, if so. But like we're saying, you really get two stories in this one miniseries here. The first two focusing on Jonathan and Martha.
Yeah.
And they fill Clark in on this past that he had been unaware of, that Jonathan was off at war and was MIA. And during this time, Martha married this wealthy man named Dan Fordman. We get some backstory here. Like I said, not from Martha, but about Martha. And I think it's Jonathan's sister-in-law, Sarah, the wife of his deceased brother, Harry, who fills him in on this, where it seems like Fordman's father was putting pressure on Martha's family, who ran the general store. A nice nod to pre-crisis continuity, because now we're in this mode. Jonathan and Martha are on the farm. They're not in town running the general store, but we get this nod to the Clark general store. So Fordman's father was putting pressure, and then the young Fordman, Dan, kind of swooped in and saved the day and made this play for Martha. And we follow Jonathan over the beginning of this miniseries as he's returning to town and reacclimating to life and trying to regain a sense of normality and calm after everything that he's experienced overseas in the war. We see a couple of the young women in Smallville showing an interest in him, but he only has eyes for Martha and is very disappointed to learn about this marriage. Before we go further, I mean, what is your take on this added chapter in the Kent family history? Does this add anything?
I liked it, but I don't. This isn't going to be great podcasting, but I don't really know why I liked it. I think what I liked about it is I liked Dan Fordman. I thought he was a really nice guy. I thought I could understand why Martha would settle for him when she thought that Jonathan had passed away. It's a classic tragic story, isn't it? That a guy goes away to war and he's thought dead, and he comes back and his sweetheart's remarried. I mean, it's so good that, as you say, Byrne does it twice in a few issues. But yeah, no, I enjoyed that element of it. And I really liked the backstory with I liked meeting Pa's father, who's a bit of a cowboy as well. He's got the big red cowboy hat. That was great. I liked meeting Sal. I thought she was a good character. I liked the context of knowing that he'd had a brother who he'd lost during the war. I really enjoyed Paul makes some comments about one of the African American guys who works at Dan Fordman's place, and kind of you get the indication that he's been through a bit of a journey, and that he's had a bit of a reckoning about his views on the world while he was away at war. So yeah, those are all things that I kind of like generally appreciated about those first couple of issues. And yeah, Dan Fordman, great guy.
Yeah, I mean, he seems like ultimately a good guy. The other wrinkle here is that he is dying from cancer.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the first issue, he makes a proposition to Jonathan, to take Martha away because he can't be a real husband to her. Now, that phrasing is used a couple of times, and I think it even comes back at the end of issue 2 with present day Martha saying to Clark, like, Dan could never really be a real husband to me. I might be reading too much into this, and I don't mean to be inappropriate, but I feel like the implication of the story is that there wasn't much bedroom activity happening in this marriage. I feel like that was and I don't know if it was meant to be like they never consummated their relationship. I don't know if it was meant to go that far. At a minimum, though, it's like, yeah, I don't think much was happening in the bedroom. And I don't know. I like I said, I might be reading too much into this, but I feel like that was thrown in there because they say it twice. They really make a point about he can't be a real husband to her. What are we referring to here? And I feel like that's done to what? Preserve Martha's purity. But then I'm like, if you're going to go then don't do this. If we have to have that disclaimer next to this first marriage, then maybe we don't have the first marriage. I don't know. I don't know how you feel about this, or if you care as much.
It actually didn't jump out to me that I didn't really. I just took it at face value as he's not going to be able to give her the life that she deserves because he's going to be sickly and he's going to be unwell or essentially he's going to die. And that he knew that she loved Jonathan anyway. I kind of saw it as he obviously held a bit of a torch for Martha. He knew that Jonathan died. She was really kind to him. She really cared for him at a difficult time. And, he thought they'd make the best of a bad situation. And she went along with it because, as we saw, it wasn't the worst. It wasn't the worst backup option. I love the way Smallville came across in these two issues as well. Everybody was talking, everybody knew everybody. The Johnny of it. Yeah, I've got to say, I really liked the setting. I really enjoyed the setting. I really enjoyed spending time in Smallville in that era.
Yeah, no, I did too. I mean, I liked seeing it's interesting. I think the town represents for Jonathan post-war what it also will then represent for Clark as this break time away from his superheroics and just kind of having that calm and that nostalgia and that home base. So I liked seeing that. And yeah, I mean, no, I agree with him. I think ultimately Dan is meant to be a good guy, a good character. His sister, on the other hand, not so much. And really is fixated on this idea that Martha is just a gold digger and that's all she's been after. But no, it turns out upon the reading of the will, because Dan does pass, and he passes before this business about the proposition can really come to a head necessarily. But during the reading of the will, it turns out at Martha's insistence, a sum of money was left to Dan's sister. The rest of it was meant to go to, what was it? The store? Their business.
I think it was the store. Yeah, I think it was the store.
Right. And unbeknownst to Martha, Dan had snuck in this bit about a piece of land going to Martha. Yeah. Which, though, now, was that meant to be the farm that then Jonathan and Martha?
I think so. Yes. Yeah, I think so.
Because it was unclear to me, because Jonathan's father has a farm. So I wasn't sure if, I don't know whose farm Jonathan and Martha ultimately work, or if the land is nearby and they combine it.
Maybe the land was around the farm.
Yeah.
Maybe or near it, or near it enough that they could farm that land as well, essentially.
Yeah.
But you're right. You're right. That jumped out. That did jump out to me as well. That did jump out to me too.
Yeah. Yeah. I always go back to the Smallville TV show. The aspect of it that kind of, I mean, they don't go far with this with the miniseries, but the idea of Martha's married into this wealthy family and she's in this big mansion and everything.
Yeah.
It's not the clearest connection point, but it does, to me, it's at least reminiscent of what we would see on the Smallville TV show, or at least kind of hear about on the show, where Martha was the big city girl. Like she had, she had this whole other side. And they tap into that when she goes to work for Lionel and really accesses that, that part of herself. But the whole idea is like she gave up all these opportunities in the big city and the life that she had to live this quiet life with Jonathan on the farm, and they're struggling to get by and all of that. So like I said, they don't hammer that here, but it just kind of that idea.
Would that be your ideal version of Martha?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I kind of
okay, interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. And going back to this miniseries, regardless, so kind of tying this together, I like that we spent time with the Kents. I really like the portion of the story following Jonathan home from the war and trying to reacclimate to his life. I thought that was strong. This business that Martha had her previous secret marriage, like I said, I don't know what it adds. I don't know, does it take anything away? Not necessarily, but I guess if I had my way, and once again, it's easy to sit here 40 years later and be like, oh, they should have done this. But nevertheless, I think it was those Sholly Fish backup stories in Action Comics during the New 52, where we follow Jonathan and Martha. And this was at the point in time where they had lost a child, right? They were having trouble conceiving. They went to the church. They talked to the priest. Yeah. I just feel like there could have been kind of a more interesting angle to explore here. Like, and the other thing too is, and maybe or audience, correct me if I'm wrong, because nothing is coming to mind. I can't think of any instance around this time or past this time where Martha's first marriage ever came up again. Maybe it did, and I'm forgetting.
I can't think of a single time, no.
So that's the other reason why I'm like, well, what difference did this make anyway?
So I think what you're saying could just have easily served that purpose. And actually, I'll come to it in a moment, because that's what I like most about the story. But the point of the story is obviously to Clark, is Clark's realization that everyone's got a story, nobody's perfect. this characterization of Clark, he is quite black and white. He is quite good and bad. He is quite straight down the line, and I think it's a good lesson for him that actually sometimes things are a little bit more complicated than you might think they are, and there is a bit more nuance to the world. There's a little bit more grey, and even your mum and dad might have some secrets. The bit that really, really works for me, and it makes me think that John Byrne actually must have gone through something similar, or at least had friends that went through something quite similar. It's actually the portion where Martha and Jonathan have got married and they're talking about losing the three children, and actually particularly the line about the doctor recommending adoption, but it not being something that Ma was ready to talk about yet. I just found that it was really only I think it was one page, but my wife and I are lucky enough to have a little girl now, but we had to go through IVF, and certainly we had similar conversations at different times, and I feel like it really captured the feelings in a really concise way that we were going through in that page, and I'd forgotten that, because the last time I read this was prior to all of that, so that was around 2015, and I'd forgotten about the Sholly Fish backup issues in Action Comics. So I'm going to go back to those because I'm looking forward to reading those now.
Yeah, no, I think they're very powerful, and and I don't know whether it was that or maybe more of their upbringing of young Clark. I mean, maybe I would have liked to see that explored, but no, I mean, I'm glad that they got the spotlight. I do agree with you. I think ultimately the purpose of this was exactly what you said. It's for the effect that it has on Clark, recognizing that there's more to the story than you might think, and everybody has their own stuff that they've gone through. So I think it works on that front. And circling back to what you asked me before about, is the Smallville TV version my preferred version of Martha? I mean, yes, generally I would say yes, but bigger picture, I do like the idea of there having been some, that they've had lives before this. And I know as I'm saying this, you're like, well, that's what we got here. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't want this specifically.
But not that life.
Not that life, but fair. Right. And so I think this touches upon kind of an idea that I like, that there's, they've had their lives. And I do kind of like the idea from the Smallville show of them not coming from exactly the same background. And when that gets explored, like with Martha going to work for Lionel, it created tension, and I thought it was interesting. So, but this is minor, but this really jumped out at me. So it's in the first issue of World of Smallville when they go to the diner, Clark and the Kents, and Clark knows the waitress from high school. And he's talking to Jonathan and Martha after, and he has some line about how, I think Maisie might be your name. He's like, I knew Maisie would be all right. Nothing spectacular.
Nothing special.
Nothing spectacular, but a good normal life in Smallville. It's like, what a dick. It's just like in Man of Steel when he's describing Lois to Jonathan and Martha. And he's like, she was not movie star beautiful, but she was all right. I'm like, what is with this guy? And
there's a few lines like that in this miniseries, actually. Yeah.
So that was wild. And then I think you probably already, I think I know where you'll land on this. I think you've already answered this, but Clark's shock over what he's learned about Martha, and the cover of issue 1, right, is him looking at the album. And it's just like, you won't believe Smallville's most shocking secret. And then like you said,
I actually love that cover, by the way. I think it's great.
And then he's off in space and everything. So I guess we have our answer. Do you feel like his response was his shock was warranted, or could he have?
Oh no, not at all. It's no, not at all. And I find it actually staggering that Jonathan and Martha wouldn't have brought that up earlier in his life, bearing in mind the relationship that they've got.
Well, they hide a lot of stuff from him, so
that's true. Well, that's true. They did, yeah. That's true. They did. Yes,
I know. But Jonathan could have thrown that in the field when he showed Clark the ship. He'd be like, Clark's reeling from this, like, wait, I'm not your natural born son. I might be Russian. I might not be American. And then Jonathan's like, on top of that.
yeah, it wouldn't have even registered, would it? So you're right. That was the time. All right. It was probably on Dan Fordman's field as well.
Yeah, I know. God.
Probably paid for the field.
But interesting. Mileage will vary, but interesting bit of business that we get with the secret first marriage of Martha. All right. And then we got these 2 issues that focus on Lana. Now, have you ever read the Millennium crossover event?
I have, but I didn't reread it for this.
No, I didn't ask you to. I wouldn't ask you to.
A lot of these, a lot of these concepts were out of my mind, to be honest.
Yeah, so I've never read Millennium. I've read about it. I'm aware of it. It's not available on the app, and it was collected a bunch of years ago. The trade is long out of print, so you have it. But but that crossover event dealt with the Manhunters and this long-term plot of infiltrating heroes' lives with these agents of the Manhunters, basically. And that's what these second 2 chapters of World of Smallville are all about. You see how Lana Lang has been this unknowing, unwitting pawn of the Manhunters for years, and that the Manhunters had infiltrated Smallville, and they had replaced Doc Whitney with one of their changelings. And Doc Whitney, because he examines all of the newborn babies of Smallville, has been implanting these microchips within them so that when activated, they will report on Clark, because that's the whole idea. The Manhunters were aware of Krypton's destruction and this fleeing spaceship and tracked the baby to Smallville and wanted to keep tabs on him. And they used these children, but specifically Lana, to the point where when Clark leaves Smallville, Lana follows to Metropolis and continues to have to report in. Again, all of this is unbeknownst to her. When we're catching up with them in present day Smallville in this miniseries, I suppose it's after the events of the Millennium crossover, and now all of this has come to light. So now she's aware, but she didn't know it at the time, right? That this cloud would come over her and she would go and report. And because of this, she can't hold a job. She's viewed as being very unreliable. And I mean, it gets to the point where she's scavenging through trash cans in some of these panels. Like it gets very, very dark as far as kind of what was going on with her in those years after she left Smallville following Clark and before she returned to Smallville which is what we saw in Man of Steel #6. What do you make of all of this?
I have to say, I'm going to start with the good stuff. I found the couple of pages where she is digging through the trash and she's really struggling to make ends meet. I thought those were quite impactful pages. It's really, really dark when she goes home and her aunt's died and she never got to say goodbye to her, and she knows that her aunt would have never known whether she was okay. I feel like that is actually dark for dark's sake. I feel like that's almost too brutal, really. Which is just ultimately where I land on the whole. It's convoluted for one thing, but it's just ultimately very sad.
Yeah. So I have a few problems with this one. So number one, and I don't know the background of the Millennium event, where it came from, if Byrne was involved in the shaping of it, if he wanted to tie in this way, if he was made to tie in this way, I don't know.
Yeah.
But the fact that we sort of have to throw the character of Lana under the bus in order to tie in with this event, I really don't care for that. So so number one, I think my big objection is that we're sort of taking a key core character from the Superman story and they're being co-opted for this event in a way that I really don't feel adds to their character. My larger problem, even beyond Lana, and I have more to say on Lana, but my bigger problem even beyond Lana is that to me, it undermines the sacredness of the Smallville setting. That Smallville, I mean, to me, this is the way I look at it. It represents the time before he becomes this icon, this legend. And there's something about having it be this, well, it's funny as I'm saying this. I caught myself because I'm like, it's this peaceful, tranquil place. But I'm like, well, if we go by the Smallville TV series, it was anything but. Every week. So, but like I said, I am open to the idea of Smallville being this gauntlet he has to get through as well. There are different ways to interpret it. But to me, this is the worst version of it, where there's all this stuff that's been going on unbeknownst to all of them for all of these years, that Smallville has been the target of these Manhunters. None of it really sits right with me. But then the last thing with Lana is just that, it's funny when you go back to that conversation that she has with Clark in Man of Steel #6, when they reunite in Smallville after years apart. And she expresses how Clark had upended her life by sharing his secret and then leaving, and how she's happy in her own way. She would have been happier if they were together and raising a family. But she really she expresses some animosity that she had felt towards him. And she even says in Man of Steel #6, there were times I wanted to expose your secret. It's, there's a harshness that comes through there. When we now look at the World of Smallville miniseries, it seems like a fair amount of that can be attributed to the influence in some way, shape, or form of the Manhunters, even if she couldn't put her finger on it, whatever the case may be, that she had been manipulated in that way and made to sort of fixate on. I mean, like, she's drawn to following him to Metropolis. So there's this influence on her. And in the miniseries, the World of Smallville miniseries, she does bring forth this question of like, well, how much of my feelings were real, and how much of them were the influence of the Manhunters? And, Clark and the Kents try to assuage her on that front and say like, no, like that friendship that you had with Clark, that was real. You were just made to report.
Yeah.
All of this to say that on the one hand, this subsequent miniseries, it absolves her a little bit of that harshness that we saw in Man of Steel #6. But on the other hand, I don't know that does the character any favors. It's like, maybe you can let her have a genuine emotion, and maybe she did feel some sort of resentment towards Clark for being so friggin' oblivious to her feelings. So to now make it that she wasn't even able to have her own feelings, I really feel like this did her a disservice. I really, out of all 4 miniseries, those 2 issues, I strongly dislike.
I totally agree. Yeah, I totally agree. I found those difficult to get through. I do feel like those 2 issues are trying to absolve her of the wrongdoing of the Manhunters. So I feel like the intention is to stop her from being tarnished with, to stop her whole backstory with Clark being tarnished is the intention of it. I'm not sure they execute that very well. I think those feelings that she expresses at the end of Man of Steel are hers, and I never saw them as particularly out of character. I never saw them as particularly something that needed explaining away or needed to be retconned. So yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, this is one of those times I basically kind of reject the Manhunter business. And I think when you look at, we're not here specifically talking about For All Seasons, but we've talked about it a lot, and appropriately so, because For All Seasons fits within the Man of Steel miniseries and that continuity. And obviously there's nary a mention of the Manhunters in that, and that's a good thing. And I think what you see play out in Man of Steel, in For All Seasons rather, I think that presentation kind of accounts for the difficulty Lana had in learning the secret, but then watching Clark go and going on this own journey of hers. But they keep it vague, and I think that serves the character a lot better. So going back to what I said at the beginning, is like, man, like I like that, to have 2 Lana-centric issues of a miniseries, like that's great. I just wish they played out entirely differently. And the fact
completely agree. That one's a big missed opportunity. Yeah.
I mean, and like we're saying with the marriage to Dan Fordman, I can't think of any references to that. Similarly, I feel like the Manhunters infiltrating Smallville business is something that everyone collectively has just sort of been like, yeah, we're not going to touch that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
All right. Shall we move on now to the final miniseries here, World of Metropolis?
Yeah, I think we should. I love the covers for these, by the way. They would make a great little set if you could have all 4 of them framed by side by side. I think they'd look awesome. Yeah,
they were a lot of fun, and structurally, this miniseries is most distinct because, like we said, with World of Krypton, even though we get the shift in perspective, or actually all the miniseries, the perspective shift, but the World of Krypton felt like the most cohesive narrative to me. World of Smallville, we just got 2 stories in that one. But now here we get these single issue spotlights. So we get one on Perry, then young Lois, then young Clark, just as he's starting out in Metropolis and going to Met You. And then Jimmy Olsen at the end. So yeah, I mean, I guess let's start, of course, with Perry White. We've already been hitting on this, but we got a very familiar setup here, right? Of him having been away and Lex moving in on Alice.
It didn't hit me when I read it at all, and it didn't hit me the first time I read it that there was that parallel between the 2 stories. And the reason is because I was so familiar with the idea that Alice White had Lex Luthor's son, because that's what we grew up with, right? So I just knew that was part of the backstory. Yeah,
well, so no, but yeah, exactly to your point. I mean, because I grew up in the era of Jerry White. I mean, I think by the time I had started reading, spoiler alert, but Jerry had been killed. But certainly he was spoken of, and I was aware, having read the Triangle era, of this. Well, two things. One, the fact that in the post-crisis era, Lex didn't have a past in Smallville with Superboy. That was done away with. But instead, they repositioned it here, where in the post-crisis era, Lex and Perry had this past together, which I then and now I think was interesting. So I knew that. And then, yes, I knew that there had been this relationship with Perry's wife that resulted in a son that Perry raised as his own, but that biologically was Lex's. So I knew that. So I think, in isolation, the Perry issue here, I appreciated it more because it's like, oh, well, now you actually get to see how that came to be. So something that had been, referenced, but now you actually get to. So I like that.
Yeah, I think for me, I found it strong. I found all the Lex stuff across the miniseries very strong, especially given current political context, knowing that version of Lex was heavily based on somebody that's in the news quite a lot at the moment, adds another layer to it for me. I thought it was fascinating to get those little snippets of Lex across the issues.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, like, he doesn't get his own issue, but he's a presence certainly in these first two. You do get a good bit of insight into this version of Lex, for better or worse, which we'll talk more about. But I mean, on the Perry front, I mean, at the beginning of it, we have Alice and Lex the morning after, and then Lex getting this call about a mystery person returning, and Alice deduces that it's Perry. And so there's this whole idea that Lex has been withholding information about whether Perry's coming back, when Perry's coming back, and clearly used that to prey on a vulnerable Alice. And when he has the opportunity, absolutely throws it right in Perry's face when he has one of his assistants bring over an earring that was found in Lex's dressing room. And even before that, the fact that the doorman and other people at Lex's, because Perry and Alice go to Lex's place to talk to Lex, and everyone knows Alice. And, Perry's, your heart breaks for this guy, because Perry's like, oh, I can't believe, the doorman, he hasn't seen you in 2 years.
No realization, you'd think,
Yeah, so your heart breaks for him.
Utterly disgusting emotional manipulation. And I know you're a big Lex fan, and I know you like a version of Lex who's got the potential to have some sort of redeeming qualities. But for this version of Lex, this is very in character, right?
Yeah. So this is as good a time as any. So we have this business about preying on Alice, the emotional manipulation, the way he throws it in Perry's face. And on top of all of this, Lex, the owner of the planet at this point in time, in this flashback tale, is planning to sell it because newspapers are dying. But Perry's able to make a play and line up investors and save the paper. But one of the catches is he has to be the managing editor, not an on the street reporter. So you kind of see how he segues into that role. So on top of everything else, there is this kind of more practical business side of the equation. But I think what really juices the story is the emotional side. So there's that in this issue with Lex. And in the next issue, we have a young 15-year-old Lois who's trying to get a job at the Daily Planet, right? She goes, she makes this appeal to Perry, and he dismisses her, but then she overhears these other reporters talking about how there's something going down at LexCorp. They're trying to get the inside track. So she sneaks out and sneaks into LexCorp Tower and grabs all of these papers, but they nab her and search her and give her different clothes to put on. And though we don't see it, the implication is that Lex has kind of beaten her with that walking stick or cane or whatever it is. But she had stuck one of those papers in her mouth, and it was enough to impress Perry White. And that gets her foot in the door. But when we end on Lex in that issue, he's speaking or thinking about Lois and makes this remark about how he'll be really interested in her in about 10 years. But for now, he will content himself with rewatching the video footage of her being strip searched.
Yeah.
So when we did our episode on the post-crisis origin tellings years ago, my guest and I were both rather put off by that kind of that gross quotient from Lex.
Yeah.
And my guest in that episode was like, oh, maybe you want to burn the issue. Now, I don't think he meant that literally, but that was the way he expressed it.
Yeah.
And we had an audience member more recently who's been going through our back catalog comment and really took issue with our reaction to Lex. Now, I've subsequently had very nice exchanges with this audience member. So it's not to put this person on blast, but I think it's an interesting point. So this audience member said, in response to our years-old episode, "I'm sorry, but wanting to burn the book because Lex is a sexual predator, insisting that Lex be a human being," in all caps now, "he's the villain, for God's sake. He's supposed to be a despicable, rotten, loathsome human being. I just think both of you totally missed the mark on your analysis of John Byrne's version of Superman's roots." Now, again, we've had conversations. He's continued to listen, and it's all good.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that I responded and that we were able to have a nice back and forth.
Yeah.
The reason I bring it up, though, is that I do get that people like the Byrne version of Lex, who does what he does to Allison Perry, who pervs on a young underage Lois Lane, who makes that indecent proposal to the waitress just to upend this poor woman's life for his own pleasure, right? I get that people like that. Where I push back, though, is kind of any idea that that's the only way to present the character. And to your point, for me, I far and away gravitate more towards a version of Lex who at least has the potential for some sort of redemption, or at least has some humanity. To me, that makes it more interesting. But, and then I'll shut up. The last thing I'll say on Lex is that what I will agree with, what he does with Perry, what he does with Lois, that waitress story, I agree. They do encapsulate, if this is the version of Lex that you're going to have, those stories really paint that picture. So they're effective in presenting that version. It's just that version is not where my heart lies when it comes to Lex.
No,
that's all.
I think, to your point, there's nothing to like about this version of Lex. I don't think people like this version of Lex, but people might. I find this version of Lex very believable in terms of a businessman that's going to get himself that successful in America at that time. You can infer from the way that he treats these people, the way he treats Alice, the way he treats Lois, the way that he treats who was the third person we were talking about? Oh, the waitress in the cafe. This is the way that he does his business. This is the way that he does his business. This is the way that he's got everything that he owns. This is his playbook. Yeah, and so for me, I just find it utterly detestable. But I think it's a very valid and it's a very it's a resonant version of the character, especially given the times that I think there's people like this running the world at the moment. There's people with similar playbooks.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I can't disagree. I can't disagree. But I guess what solidifies my feelings is seeing the development that Lex would undergo under subsequent creators. Yeah. And you get to the unauthorized biography and you get this backstory with his parents and then the abusive foster home and all of that. And what I wanted to ask you, I'm particularly curious because I know what a big Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman fan you are. You're going to be joining me not too long from now. We're going to talk about an aspect of the series together. And as we've already mentioned, and we'll mention a lot, the Lois and Clark TV series very much in the mode of the Byrne / Triangle era Superman and supporting cast. The John Shea Lex, evil businessman, manipulative, but there was definitely a charm to him, and he does not veer into this, unless I'm really misremembering an episode, but I mean, he really doesn't, in my memory, veer into this kind of gross, manipulative for its own sake model. And I'm curious kind of because I know what a big Lois and Clark fan you are, but you also like this version. Yeah. How do you kind of reconcile those?
I think John Shea is probably my ideal version of the character because he's very suave, he's very sophisticated. He is a bit older than Superman. I'm happy for him to be a bit older than Superman, but he's a believable love interest for Lois in it. You can see why the people of Metropolis fawn over this guy. Whereas actually Byrne's version, I'm not sure that really anybody's falling over him.
Well, though, it's fun. I'll keep this real quick. But yeah, because I was going to say it's crazy to think someone with no charm would somehow have all of these people flocking to him, but it happens. So
it does it. Sometimes it happens, doesn't it? Sometimes.
So yeah, we'll move on now to issue number 3, which is the spotlight on young Clark.
Mm-hmm.
And as we've been discussing, we're in post-crisis mode. This Clark Kent was never Superboy, and he learned about his potentially alien origins, and he took off, and he had this journey around the world that we'll see that filled in more in years to come, before ultimately making Metropolis his base of operations for a period of time before he makes his public debut. And so, yeah, in this mini series number 3, we see him arrive in the city, and he gets a modest hotel room. He gets a job first as a busboy or a dishwasher, and then a short order cook at this restaurant. And he is able to make his way into Metropolis University. This is business about Smallville High not having the proper accreditation in order for him to get into which I'm like, what's going on over there in Kansas?
I'm from the UK, so I just bought that. I didn't even question it.
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, I have a background in law school admission, so we would be looking at undergrad schools. But yeah, I mean, as far as high schools not having the proper accreditation for certain colleges, I can't speak to that specifically. But yeah, it just makes me wonder, like, wait, what are they doing over there in Smallville? But so he ends up having to take these placement tests and all of that. But and you see him using his powers without a costume, of course, to intervene when necessary. I think the thing that stood out to me most about this issue was, you probably know where I'm going with this, but his dalliance with the red-haired Ruby.
Yeah.
Yeah, the slightly older woman he works with, who really seems to show him the ropes, you know?
100%, she shows him the ropes. No, I that is the aspect I liked of it, actually. I liked that. They seemed to have a very supportive, fun, ultimately, relationship. There wasn't much to it. She met him. She seemed to quite like him. She seemed to know it was never going to go anywhere. She didn't seem to be particularly heartbroken when he moved, when he left working there. But she kind of seemed to know that was the end of it. It didn't really go into too much detail about what level of kind of commitment they went into or anything like that. But I liked it. I liked him having a girlfriend, you know? I thought that was good fun.
Well, it's interesting because he mentions in that
it
issue.
Wasn't essential.
Yeah, like I said, this to me kind of falls into that category I laid out at the beginning. Some of them, like this didn't take anything away from me. It didn't really add anything either. It was fine. No. But it's funny because he talks about having had a couple of girlfriends in Smallville. It's like, well, who were they? Because he's like, had a couple of girlfriends. Then there was also Lana. So I'm like, all right. And then he has this experience with Ruby, and he says, because he's thinking back on it, he's like, we shared a lot over those 2 years, but never my secret. So I was like, yeah, but you did share a lot. But then I'm thinking to myself, there's also this business that will come later in the Triangle era about when he was traveling the world in France. That woman Simone Desiato, who also showed him the ropes. I mean, this guy got quite the education.
He takes off to Park End.
But there's nothing to support this. But I kind of like the idea. Not that I like the idea, but part of me's like, is he presenting himself to each of these women as if he's like, oh, like I don't have any experience, like because I feel like I don't know, like he's running a scam.
If it works, it works, Anthony. You know.
Yeah, but I feel like he consistently presents himself, right? It's like, oh, fresh off the farm, like I'm new here, and they just take him away. But I do like at the end of issue 3 that Clark goes to visit Ruby, and she's married and she's got kids. It's been a while, it's been months, but they do still keep in touch. And again, this is another character I don't think ever, to my knowledge, never acknowledged since.
But I like that. I mean, it was nice. It was nice. I love that he checked in on her. I love that he said to the kids that, oh, I've arranged for Superman to come and see you. Yeah, I liked it. For me, it was probably the most it was actually probably of the 4 Metropolis issues, it's probably the most forgettable one.
Yeah, I know. I think that's probably fair. And also, I do want to say, in fairness, and maybe to argue against myself, it's not like, oh, the story's not valuable if it's never referenced after. It's still filling in some backstory. And the other thing, and the other thing too, like we said before, I mean, Byrne wasn't meant to leave as quickly as he did. He did a lot in 2 years, but the intention was for him to be on the book for years past that. So for all we know, maybe this was like, that's the thing. I don't know. Maybe Byrne did have something in mind to do with the Fordmans or Ruby or, some of these other characters who pop up. I don't know, but I do agree with you. Probably the more forgettable of the bunch.
I bet he was going to do something with the sister. the sister of Dan Fordman. I bet he was. She's set up as such a spiteful, nasty, villainous woman. Surely.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
All right. And then the very last issue of the final miniseries here are Jimmy Olsen Spotlight. I would argue, out of all three miniseries, the most traditional type of story, where you see how 100%. Jimmy developed.
Did you do this one when you did the Jimmy episode?
Yes. Yeah. So I had revisited this one recently. Okay, cool. Because in this one, the present day framing device, Jimmy's in trouble. He doesn't want to use his signal watch until he's absolutely positive he can't get out of it on his own, because it's only for emergencies. And then we get this flashback. We see a much younger Jimmy, and he's spending all this time at the Daily Planet for this unpaid internship, much to the chagrin of his mom. And he's got this friendship with the neighbor who has a tough home life. And then it gets to the point where she overdoses on these pills because she's struggling so much. And Jimmy and his mom, they can't get through to anyone over the phone. So Jimmy has this idea to use an ultrasonic signal sound to alert Superman. And so he just kind of jury-rigs something really quickly and is able to get Superman's attention and get this girl to the hospital. And Superman is impressed with Jimmy's ingenuity. And, there's not a moment where we actually see Superman give him a signal watch. I think the implication is that Jimmy then ultimately fashions one more formally himself, but Superman allows him to. He
kind of has Superman's permission to use it, essentially.
Yeah, I like, I don't think we even mentioned Jimmy in the last episode, but understandably so. He's got very fleeting page time in Man of Steel, and it's very much because that book is covering so much time. And he's very young in that, and we get like Jeepers and Golly Whiz and stuff like that, like kind of like a very, I think, kind of basic version of the character. So I feel like this fleshed him out a little bit and took us on a little bit of a journey with him. But I liked his ingenuity and the business about the signal watch. I don't have much to say about it, but it was solid.
What I really liked is that I felt like they were kind of able to really have their cake and eat it with Jimmy in this one. They were able to have that classic younger version of the character, but also have the more accomplished, more grown-up version of Jimmy, who's had a little bit of success. He can go back and he can see this girl and he can check on her, and she's and she takes him very seriously because he's got a great job at the Daily Planet, and he's really his own man. But they've also got that more classic traditional version. And just going back to that conversation you were having about Jeff Johns and Richard Donner resetting Jimmy to kind of factory settings in a way, and how jarring that was. I just thought this was quite an artful way of doing both in one story, really. Yeah,
I agree. This might be the winner of the bunch. I don't know, but no, this was a very solid one. I don't know, maybe not the most memorable, but a very, very solid Jimmy centric story.
Actually, genuinely, it might be my favorite of the bunch. I really enjoyed this one. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to say? Anything we didn't talk about that you want to before we sign off?
Yeah, I just think I wouldn't go into reading them expecting Superman for all seasons. They're not necessarily essential reading. They're not going to be something that stands the test of time in the same way as I believe that Man of Steel does. I believe For All Seasons does. But they're just great fun. I think they're just great fun. And there's really impactful moments that we've kind of touched on in our conversation today. I think actually in some ways for John Byrne helmed books, they've got quite a nice pre-crisis feel to them in some ways. And I think it's a lot of the art in the Smallville and the Metropolis books, especially that Jimmy one, the business with the signal watch and him creating it. I just think it's a really good fun series. So please check it out if you haven't before, and let Anthony know what you thought.
Yeah, please. And yeah, I echo that. I think that's a good mindset to go in with, to with the exception of the Krypton one, which I do feel largely gives you a solid story start to finish. Otherwise, I would say really kind of go in with the understanding that it's ancillary material to round out the rest of what Byrne was doing. So keep in mind the context, and I think you'll go far. The other thing too that I'll mention in closing here is that we do get, in some cases, it's like a full page or more with the exact same dialogue as the Man of Steel miniseries. So a lot of these stories they give you kind of what came before, but then they take you up to what you've already seen and then kind of show it to you again, which as I'm sitting there with the Man of Steel issues on my app and the Man of Steel issues in the hardcover on my shelf and the Man of Steel single issues on the table, I'm like, I don't need this, But at the same time, I recognize back in the 80s, people didn't have the access to go back as
totally
easily.
Different context, right?
Yeah, so they were giving you that recap. So that's fine.
I was thinking about this earlier in the day, actually, and as we kind of mentioned earlier, Lois and Clark was my entry point to the character. It was really hard to get the VHSs in this country. I don't think, after watching it on TV when it first aired, I don't think I got to watch it again until Superman Returns came out and the DVDs came out. So I mean that was the context. So that'll be why they're recapping a little bit now and then. And actually, in the post-crisis issues, there is a lot more of that anyway, isn't there?
Yeah. All right. Well, Duncan, thank you so much. First appearance on Digging for Kryptonite.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. It was an absolute pleasure. Yeah, I've been a listener for years now, and a very, very key part of my week. So thank you so much for having me on. It's been really fun.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for joining me. Audience, thank you for tuning in. Make sure you keep coming back. Next up, over these next 2 episodes, we'll be going through Byrne's entire run on the main titles. Until then, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Thank you. By popular demand, Digging for Kryptonite merch is now available at our TeePublic store. Visit the link in the show notes to get your DFK shirts, hats, mugs, and more. Support the show and receive exclusive content, including the spin-off podcast Beyond Metropolis, by becoming a member at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato. My sincere thanks to all patrons. Please subscribe, rate, and review today via your platform of choice, and continue the conversation by joining us on social media. Flat Squirrel Podcast is also home to another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman, now covering the color era of the classic George Reeves series. Subscribe today. Digging for Kryptonite is a Flat Squirrel production. Key art by Isaiah Simmons and theme music by Dan Pritchard.